All right.
Brown you ever
We are ready to begin. Again.
They're small. They're growing like crazy.
Dr. Trefry and Dr. Fox, welcome.
Thank you for inviting us. I'm John Trefry. Austin Fox is over here. I get the short straw. I get to talk today. Actually, I have seniority. I chose to talk today. My dress here, my cummerbund, is I just had shoulder surgery last Thursday. I'm doing great. Ignore it. Okay, much like what Beth talked about, we're interested in trying to address this question. My title is a question. Now, what are the sources and chemical forms of nutrients that go into the lagoon? And indeed, the answers to this question are pivotal to how we design and carry out the restoration of the lagoon, and in turn, how we spend the money we have to carry out this restoration. Sources are indeed important. So let me see if I can give you some idea of some of the things we've learned. So for today, I've got a few nuggets, sort of like a bunch of short stories. First of all, this is really tough work. And I'm going to introduce some things that are a bit complicated. My wife said they were okay, so I think I'll try. But next is, I'm unbelieved I'm even talking about this, but more than 90% of the material that makes up muck has nothing to do with sewage. And I was surprised that this has been going around the back alleys somewhat. Let me see if I can't clarify that. Then, our other finding is that the isotopic signature of nitrogen, and the nitrogen being released from muck, is the same as in benthic algae. The same nitrogen that's being blamed on sewage. I'll clarify that in much more detail. Then, next thing is, well-planned muck dredging should occur now because, and I'll tell you the answer in a little bit. And I want to thank the members of this committee, because one of the things you've done that's most valuable is you've been an open-minded group to realize we've got to sort of go down all these different avenues to solve the problem until we really figure out what the right one is. I don't know what the right one is, and no one else does. And so this is great, and I applaud you for being so open-minded. Okay, if you turn to your 2019 Save Our Indian River Lagoon project plan, you'll find some data in it. I threw it on a pie chart. And what it shows, as listed in there, is loading from different sources of nitrogen to the North Indian River Lagoon. And what it shows is that the release from muck, stormwater runoff, groundwater base flow in the atmosphere sort of take even amounts of what is contributed to the lagoon in nitrogen each year. It's about 680 tons in the North Indian River Lagoon. And each one of those might have an error of 10 or 15%. Maybe the stormwater is 24 plus or minus 10%. So we don't have them much better than that. But when I looked at this in the report, the first thing I thought, wait a minute, these aren't sources. These are transport pathways. Come with the muck flux, come with the atmosphere. We now need to look at sources. But when I looked a little bit further, down in the base flow here, there was a little caveat that said, septic, leaking sewer, reclaimed water. Those are sources. And I would add to those sources fertilizer. What happened to fertilizer? Why isn't it on the map anymore? Decomposing vegetation, biosolids, other organic waste, the things that Beth mentioned a few minutes ago. These are all specific sources, all coming by an avenue of base and groundwater flow, or for that matter, all of these come from stormwater runoff too. But we have to get back to the source, not just what's coming down the big creek. So that's what we're working on. And in our lab, we're working on muck flux, stormwater runoff, and groundwater. No one's working on the atmosphere. Okay. Just to give phosphorus its fair due, I'm going to do more nitrogen than phosphorus today. Austin is a phosphorus expert. Next time he comes, he can talk about that. But the only difference here is that we have muck flux, stormwater, and base flow. There's very little phosphorus in rain because it's not volatile, unlike nitrogen oxides that get up in the rain and come down, so we don't have much phosphorus in rain. That's cool. And that's about 70 tons per year. We have direct estimates of the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus coming down the tributaries, coming out of the muck, and these numbers make some sense. I think we're doing okay. Again, within plus or minus 10%. Okay, I'd like to focus in on, and it's embarrassing I'm focusing on something you think that's all I do is muck. It isn't all I do. But I want to show you something about the sources of muck. Where does muck come from? So let's go over to the next slide. And I have shown this slide 312 times. This is the 313th time. And what is Indian River Lagoon muck? No one listens to me. It's greater than 90% water by volume. That's unbelievable. Just think of it, it's really fluid, isn't it? And so that's one of the first things. But if you take and dry it out, I've been drying it out for 30 years, and one of the first things you find is that 60% of it to 50% of it is silt and clay. Silt and clay aren't in sewage. Silt and clay come from a well-identified source. They're coming off our land. So it's erosion of soil on the mainland or wherever. It's also washout from sod. There's a few percent silt and clay in all St. Augustine lawn. And that has washed out. You ever watch fresh St. Augustine go in and it rains? It looks like the Mississippi River if that house is at the lagoon. It blows your mind. And so that is what is the dominant component of muck, is silt and clay. Silt and clay is not in sewage. Okay. Then if you take quartz and carbonate shell material, we want it all to be mostly that, and that's just natural, so we don't have to worry about that one. And then the hard one. The hard one is organic matter. And so we can start with sourcing in two broad areas. One is terrestrial, the things that come off the land. Vegetation, grass cuttings, sewage, septic releases, those are all broad terrestrial input. And then we can take things that are produced in the lagoon. So nutrients create seagrass, the seagrass decomposes, it makes muck. Algae comes in, it decomposes and settles in, it contributes the organic matter that's in muck. So 10 to 20% of the muck is this organic matter that comes from a variety of different sources. Which one's more important than the other? Hard to know, isn't it? Well, as a geochemist of many, many decades, we use a variety of relatively sophisticated chemical tools to identify sources. And my wife said I could show this because she got through it. So bear with me. She's a psychologist. So what are isotopes? So an isotope is an atom of the same element that has a different mass. So for carbon, there are two naturally occurring stable isotopes of carbon. Carbon-12 is 98.9% of the carbon on Earth, and carbon-13, that's 1.1% of the carbon on Earth. It turns out that there are minor variations in these percentages depending on where that substance is, what chemical reactions it went under, and you can actually trace it based on the relative ratios of these two isotopes. It's incredibly neat material. So let's look at the organic matter content of muck sediments and see if we can do a broad identification of a source, a broad source. I'm just going to go simple this time, based on isotopes. So these are data for sediments from Turkey Creek, the Grand Canal, Rockledge, and Mims. I've just sort of spread them out here so you can see the different places more clearly. There are isotope values down the bottom here. And you can see they range from about minus 27 to minus 18. Well, many years ago, 30 years ago, I did some work on the Mississippi Delta where I showed that what you could do is go and collect the things that grow in the Mississippi Delta or in the lagoon, that grow in the lagoon, like seagrasses, algae, and find out what their isotopic ratio is. In the lagoon, it's about minus 18 to minus 20. Then you can go back into the Turkey Creek or wherever you want, collect all the stuff that's coming down Turkey Creek or all the grasses, and what is the isotopic ratio of that? Well, it's minus 26 to minus 28. So that's terrestrial material. So when you look at these sediments, there's very little that's pure terrestrial material, there's very little bit that's pure lagoonal material. Most of it is a blend. And so when you go to all these other sites, they're a mixture of material that came off the land, organic matter, grass clippings, whatever, trees, or material that was produced in the lagoon, seagrasses and things like that. And so you have a start. And if you go in Turkey Creek or at the mouth of Turkey Creek, it's 70% terrestrial and 30% marine. If you go to Mosquito Lagoon, it's 90% to 100% marine. There's hardly any terrestrial up there. So you got to start to look at that. So as you move around the lagoon, this is a first cut. This is just, I'm not going to take too many cuts on this, but the first cut, it's one way of looking at sources. So we've done this all over the lagoon a long time ago. Okay. Now I need to throw in sewage. So one of the important things here is when you look at the sediments in the lagoon, sewage typically has a carbon isotope ratio of minus 24 to minus 28. Very little of the organic matter that's found in this muck has a clear sewage source. And that fits. And we just have to, so muck is just a little bit different. I think sewage is really important. I just want you to realize there are two different carts. You just have to realize they're different. They're both really important. I don't disagree with that at all. Okay, so muck contains little or no sewage carbon. Okay. I keep going. Yeah. Matt's not glazed over. We're all right. Actually, he took a class from me and learned all this.
Dr. Trefry, as one of the 4 or 5 people that watch this online, could you get closer to the mic, please?
Yes, ma'am. I'm a roamer. Okay. I can't believe you can't hear me, but that's okay. Thank you. I will try to do that. Okay. We also can use other isotopes. In fact, no good study does anything with just one thing. An ideal thing would have carbon isotopes, nitrogen isotopes, and some of the chemicals that Beth mentioned. You got to have many, many different tools in your bag to try and prove things. So now I'm going to switch and look at nitrogen isotopes. And just for the record, 99.6% of the nitrogen on Earth is nitrogen-14, and only 0.4% is nitrogen-15. But the fractions change depending on where that material has been, what chemical reactions it's gone with. They're neat tracers. They're just really neat tracers. So I'm going to take this away, and all of a sudden I'm going to go into nitrogen isotopes. And these are the same sediments down here. Oh, so they all have a nitrogen isotope ratio somewhere between 3 and 6. Okay, so we've had a lot of input from Peter Burrell about measuring nitrogen isotopes in macroalgae. And so he published in his paper that sewage has a nitrogen isotope ratio between 7 and 10. And then he went on to show that that matches what's in drift algae, and therefore sewage is the source of nitrogen to drift algae. So let's look at that a little bit more closely. I'm going to add just one thing to it. There are no data that I know of for nitrogen isotopes in sewage from Brevard County. This is just a number out of the literature. If you look at the literature in more broad review, the range is huge. Is it tertiary treatment? Is it primary treatment? Is it just coming out of a septic system? There's huge ranges in the nitrogen and carbon isotopes based on where that sewage came from. So we have a tracer right there, a really powerful tracer. But we have no data for that from Brevard County. I recommend you consider giving Austin Fox, as I'm retiring, some money to go look and collect all the sewage and do nitrogen and carbon isotopes. All right, so what we've done is to raise the point that I raised to Peter several years ago. Wait a minute. I know that the nitrogen isotope ratio of the nitrogen that's coming out of muck is the same as what you're saying is sewage. So we went and collected samples. You all are aware, I think, that decomposing organic matter in muck by bacteria produces nitrogen in the form of ammonium that comes out into the overlying water. And that's what we're concerned about when we talk about the muck flux and the release of nitrogen from muck. Well, the isotopic ratio for this ammonium is +5 to +10. And we've done quite a few of them, and it's what's in the literature. It's nothing surprising or new. But what's interesting is if we go back now to this other chart and add our number on here, this is ammonium fluxing from muck that we have running between 6 and 10. Basically, it's the same ratio that you find in benthic algae. In fact, I would contend, if you look at the ammonium nitrogen isotope data and the data for benthic algae, you'd say, man, I think that's a better fit with what's in the benthic algae than sewage. But they both are there. There's definitely both there. To prove it, we need to use 2 isotopes plus other components. So what was done is good, but not adequate enough. So at this point, we do not know the relative importance of the muck flux of nitrogen relative to the sewage flux of nitrogen for nitrogen, phosphorus, silicon. We have not a clue. No one knows. And so this is something we can work on. We can work on trying to use these different tracers to get a better handle on what is the important source. They're both important. There's no way they can't both be important. But maybe one is more important in Banana River Lagoon, where another one is more important over near Rockledge. And we can actually zero in on those kinds of things. Big picture. Okay, that's enough of isotopes. Oh, well, I guess there's one more thing here. Just reminding yourself now that these are transport pathways. We're trying to zero in on individual sources, of which there are many. And so it's a complex task. Okay, you have just completed my short course in nitrogen and carbon isotopes. When you download this picture, you can just write in your name, and I've signed it for you. And if you want the full version, I'd be happy to teach you. It'll blow your mind what's known. You know, what's known in the world about all this stuff is beyond comprehension. This level of knowledge is beyond anything you could ever dream. I'm playing at level 0.5 on the Game Boy. There's level 10 up there. I mean, it's just, we are such a knowledgeable society. We've got to use this knowledge. Okay, any more or we stop? More. All right. Okay, I'm going to go on to chemical forms of nitrogen and phosphorus. It's not going to take me any longer than what it just took me to do this. Okay. You want the full version? I'd be happy to teach you. It'll blow your mind what's known. You know, what's known in the world about all this stuff is beyond comprehension. This level of knowledge is beyond anything you could ever dream. I'm playing at level 0.5 on the Game Boy. There's level 10 up there. I mean, it's just, we are such a knowledgeable society. We've got to use this knowledge. Okay, any more or we stop? as a chemical oceanographer for 45 years, no one in my field ever measures total nitrogen and total phosphorus. What an absurd number. What we measure are all the different components that make it up and add it up, and that's the total nitrogen. But if you know the total nitrogen, it's like having a black box. You don't know what's in it. And so if you take what we've done here, sampled different creeks, St. Sebastian, Turkey Creek, Crane Creek, and O'Galley River between 2015 and 2017, and took all the data and divided up what the different forms of nitrogen were coming down these creeks into the lagoon, you get the following. About 60% is dissolved organic nitrogen. It dominates. What's in it? Something as simple as amino acids, maybe waste like urea, or some really complex nitrogen compounds that make up this dissolved organic nitrogen. Note that nitrogen and nitrate and nitrite are only about 15%. Ammonium is only about 7%, and then basically slime on particles, also called particulate organic nitrogen, is about 21%. So this is what, and it's actually pretty uniform for these 4 different systems. Now, it turns out that this has importance to how this nitrogen is used and cycled in the lagoon. So we need to know this and everywhere. Let me give you an example. So, as you may well be aware, the brown tide gained its notoriety in the Laguna Madre in Texas. Some colleagues of mine did a study there when the brown tide was on its height. And what they looked at was, how does brown tide grow as a function of the form of nitrogen that it's being fed? And so here's ammonium, and it reports here that there's a cell division of 1 division per day. Basically, that means that in 1 day, the number of cells double if you're using ammonium. If you go down to nitrite, it takes a couple of days or more for the number of cells to double. Guess what? Oreoumbra lagunensis can't even use nitrate, does not have the biochemical ability to use nitrate. Well, isn't it nice to know all these things? Well, the funny thing here is that urea is something, it's a proxy for the different waste products that can come out of any of these organisms. It grows really well on urea, organic nitrogen. Okay, from my studies in the Banana River Lagoon during the last brown tide, we had huge rains in September and October 2017 that brought in huge amounts of ammonium, nitrate, and nitrite. Huge amounts that sat there and sat there. And then by January, they were all gone. Yet the bloom went on for 3 or 4 more months at really high levels. During that whole time, there was no ammonium, no nitrate, no nitrite. The organism was producing urea-like compounds and using them, just living in its own waste for 3 months as fast as it could. And it pees that stuff out pretty fast. And so it's just living, it's living on its own waste. There was none of the other chemicals there. Wow. Interesting. There are so many different ways I can take this in terms of thinking about managing the system and so forth. But that's an example of the power of knowing the different forms. If you're looking at total nitrogen, hard to see what's going on. Okay. I'm going to go on then to just add a couple more things on forms, because this is key. This is the one you saw for nitrogen in the tributaries. For phosphorus, there's just 3 forms we're looking at. Phosphate's about half of it. So we call this the bioactive form of phosphorus. The most bioactive forms of nitrogen are ammonium and N plus N. Phosphate's pretty abundant. There's plenty of, relative to the total phosphorus, a lot of it is bioreactive. And organic phosphorus and particulate phosphorus. Again, I find it much more comfortable to think about the things that make this up. And then within this one, there's a grab bag of hundreds of things. So it gets pretty complicated. All right, now I'm going to move into the lagoon, because I'm trying to make one little point here. In the lagoon, as we go from the creeks to the lagoons, you can see the amount of dissolved organic nitrogen goes up, and the amount of bioavailable N plus N, nitrate and nitrite, and ammonium goes down. Particulate nitrogen is about the same. For phosphorus, big notice a sharp decrease in phosphate. It's being removed by the organisms that are out there. And so, pretty big change. We can follow this temporally, spatially, all different ways. There are some really neat stories. Even during the brown tide, what happened in one place to these chemical forms was quite different than in another place. But the last one I want to show in these pies is this. The ammonium that's coming out of muck is 99% ammonium. The nitrogen coming out is 99% ammonium. A little bit of dissolved organic nitrogen. The phosphorus that's coming out of muck is 99% phosphate and a little bit of organic phosphorus. Sewage is about the same. Most of what comes out of sewage is very bioreactive. So let's focus on these bioreactive elements. Let's put isotope markers on them, and then we can sort of chase them around the lagoon a little bit. This is expensive, time-consuming, and we've got to use it in the right places. Maybe pick one place to work at. Banana River between south of 520 or somewhere that's really a mess. I think it might be a great place to work. I think one of the problems there is we got too many canals that are all oozing out stuff. Okay. 30 years ago, I was approached by the Florida Inland Navigation District and Ted Moorhead, who was working with Bill Nelson, and they wanted to dredge Crane Creek and Turkey Creek. And I said, that's stupid. You can't dredge now. Muck's still coming in. I see this in the newspaper recently. Well, I learned that I was wrong. I don't think it's stupid to dredge muck now. And let's see if I can make my case to you. And so I've shown this slide many times. Stop the runoff that forms muck. Now you know what it is. It's soil and all the other things. And you can do all sorts of things to try to stop it. We're doing some of them, and I applaud the county for doing that. There needs to be more done to try to stop this, mainly the silt and clay, and to some degree the vegetation. Well, I went and looked at Crane Creek and Turkey Creek that were going to be dredged back in the 90s. And what I noticed was really interesting to me from what I had done back in the 80s was the muck had filled in almost all of Crane Creek and it was oozing out into the lagoon. And the idea of dredging that and creating a sump near the mouth was, hey, that makes sense. And so it would lessen the chance that that muck would go out in the lagoon. So a lot of the reason these tributaries were dredged was to try to keep it from going out into the lagoon. It seemed like a good idea. Okay, roll ahead to present, where we've done a lot of dredging in the tributaries or creeks or whatever you want. What about out in the open lagoon? Should we do that or not do that? Well, first of all, it does remove the solid phase nitrogen phosphorus forever, or wherever you put it. It does decrease, done appropriately, the amount of nitrogen phosphorus coming out of the muck. It does decrease turbidity, and son of a gun, it's a better place to live. You take the muck away and you'll find things that want to live there. You don't want to hear this, and I don't believe I'm saying it. I wouldn't have said it 30 years ago. We're never going to stop the ingredients that make muck from coming in. Right now, there are at least 2 people throwing grass cuttings in the lagoon somewhere. I have never been in the lagoon a day where I didn't see that going on. The lack of education and knowledge of the people of Brevard County is overwhelming. They just throw stuff into the lagoon all the time. I don't see, and if we don't, there's still stuff washing down the canals all the time. There's dust coming in the air. Therefore, we're never going to get it all out, but we can do some very sophisticated, well-planned dredging that works now and does a lot of good things. And I'm hearing this thing about, let's wait on the muck. Well, sure, but let's only dredge the muck that really makes sense. And that's a task that a lot of us have worked on. So, I'm done. And identifying sources is really tough, but we need it. And we need to do it in a focused manner. I'm really into maybe picking an area or two and really working hard on that area. So another important thing is we believe, Austin and I, that we've reached a tipping point. And that if we were to stop sewage now, it wouldn't be enough. And the analogy that we use is the fish tank analogy. If you don't clean the bottom crap, all the crap that's in your gravel out, you're going to have a mess anyway. And so to some degree, somewhere along the line, we've got to get this crap out of the bottom where it is. We now, thanks mostly to Austin, have really good maps of muck. And we estimate that it occupies maybe less than 5% of the area of the lagoon. That's a surprise. There are a lot of false positives in the old data. But it's still more than 5 million cubic yards, and it's still fluxing out at least 25 to 40% of all the nitrogen phosphorus that comes into the lagoon. Well-planned dredging should occur. Some of it's occurring. To date, I don't know of any dredging that wasn't paid for by something other than your money from the sales tax. So all the money that came from the state did all of the other creeks and so forth. So you haven't done anything wrong yet. Oops. And finally then, I think that as we identify the sources, we've got to really do that. Then we can make better plans of what to do. And I really push on that. Then along the way, we can't lose sight of understanding and looking at habitats and species abundance. This isn't all chemistry. It isn't all muck. It isn't all sources. And then public outreach and education. I got Courtney to agree with me that, believe it or not, everyone in this room is passionate But of the 600,000 people in Brevard County, I think there's at least 500,000 that don't really pay much attention. And so I think public outreach and education are really important, done by someone really, beautiful and handsome and charismatic. Not me, not an old man. But I do think that that's important. I'm sad to hear that that's being poo-pooed, and I hope that's not true. I have lots of friends, lots of colleagues, have had lots of money. I left all my money to Austin, but I thank you. So we've been funded by the St. Johns River Water Management District, DEP, funded through Brevard County, and the National Estuary Program. I've never had any money from the sales tax. Austin may get some if you decide, which I think you should, that some small fraction of this money should go to science, because you are making decisions without the right data. And what do you find? I can't make the decision. Thanks. I'm done.
I actually was going to ask Virginia, because my understanding is that we can't, via the resolution, spend money on research.
Right. The current plan does not fund research. It includes the research priorities that have been identified through several previous efforts. The exception to that is in the respond section, where we are trying to measure the performance of the projects that we are selecting. If in the course of that we happen to collect some other information that's useful to future decision making, some people would call that research, but in the plan we're calling it performance measurements.
Dr. Trefry, so what would you estimate the cost of some research like that? And not only that, but how long would that take? Right now we're in year 2, and obviously we do have decisions ahead of us, and there are going to be others that have decisions ahead of us. And if that was something we would do, how long until we would have some results? Would you come out of retirement to help it speed it up? That's the other question.
Retirement means I'm not getting paid. I guarantee you.
So we're all retired.
Yes, that's exactly right. Since I retired officially on January 4th, I probably would have worked harder and more hours than anyone at FIT. And trying to finish a lot of what I'm doing. So, yes. So how long? It depends. The funding agency puts the pin on it. You could do quite a bit of sourcing in 1 to 2 years. And the cost of isotope analyses has gotten cheaper and cheaper. You have to go and collect the samples. You have to preserve the samples. Now, I think you could start to do a really comprehensive job of getting sewage. We have to honor the sewage signature. We don't know what the sewage is. It's really hard to believe. If we picked maybe from the northern, from south of 520 down to Pineda Causeway and Banana River Lagoon, sort of my old favorite place was on the other side in the River Lagoon. I think for $250,000 in 1.5 to 2 years, you could have made a huge project on that area.
Yes, Todd.
So I just first want to start off with, we've had a lot of presentations, and I want to thank you because by far this has been the best presentation I've sat through. And I would encourage us to never call this research, because this is data collection that's validation of the of what's going on. Mm-hmm. You can do it in context of research, but this is no different than us monitoring septic tanks of whether we've got nitrogen coming out of septic tanks. And the other thing is, it is by far the most pertinent presentation that I've seen in terms of affecting the dollars that we spend, which is exactly the discussion that came on the commission meeting the other night. So I would, even though I don't really vote, I would highly support us looking at this, because we got tens of millions of dollars that we're going to spend that clearly everyone wants to spend effectively, and making sure that we're going after the right things, or that if we're going to go after something that wouldn't be the highest dollar return, that we're doing it consciously and for other soft reasons that might exist as well, but that at least we're equipped to make all of those decisions. And I don't think it has to stop us. or even slow us down, because the reality is we know that there's things that will have benefit. Will they be the best decision? Maybe not, but they're the best decision today with the information we have. But certainly we should equip ourselves to make better decisions 2 years from now so that we've got as effective a use of our money as possible. So thank you, and I think we should seriously consider, as part of anything we come back to the Commission with, funding this type of data analytics that support our decision making.
I just add two very brief comments. One is that we need to come into the 20th century because if you go to Sweden or other places, they're using all these isotopes. They're way ahead of us. Brevard County is a little behind on the quality of science that's going into supporting the lagoon. I have been around the world for 40 years, the Arctic, all over the place. I've only been back doing this for 3 years. And I just see we are way behind the curve in getting the science needed to make the decisions. So I'm asked, what should you do? I don't know the best answer. That's why what you're doing is fine, reaching out in all directions. But you're right on, Vinny. We've got to do something to know that it's paying off. And how do we tell it's working? That's really tough, too. I'm struggling with these things, and I really think about this. Now, that's it. That's good. Thank you.
Charles?
Yeah, hi, Dr. Trefry, have you had a chance to speak one-on-one with any of the county commissioners about this?
Not in the present session. No, I haven't in the past, many times. Going way back into the 80s and 90s when they were real receptive, back when the county commission bought all the land on the Barrier Islands and no one ever built there, times have changed.
Well,
So I have not. I have not been I'm laying low.
well, because it was mentioned at the meeting that the county commissioners were open, and I think, are the county commissioner representatives here? Okay, so, there's been a lot of people going through their offices, and it seems like they should hear some science has been, very well documented, peer-reviewed to help with the decisions that are being made.
Or what we don't know.
And what we don't know,
or what we think we know that we don't know.
well, science is all about, using the best knowledge. And as scientists, we don't have the absolute truth, but we base our decisions on what we know. It's fluid. We can change those decisions as we get more data. But I haven't heard anything today that changes any of the conclusions we made and recommendations.
Brilliant. But then Charlie was one of my graduate students. When did you graduate? 1981?
1980.
1980. Oh, God, we're old, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
You've already retired.
Before there was muck.
Yes. No. We had,
Well,
no, that's true. That's true.
before
We
we
didn't
studied
really
muck.
find muck until later in the 80s. That's true. That's true. Wow.
John?
Sorry.
Thank you. Whomever does the recording, guys, if we can take this presentation and package it and get it up on the website, just for all the folks that live around where I am, to recognize this is way more complex than a quick little blurb that they write on Facebook. Much of it way over my head, not Charlie's, obviously, but it makes sense. So thank you very much. As far as the allocation of funding, we can recommend anything we want. This may or may not be inclusive in the legislation, but all funding is done by the county commission. So if they chose to fund this, they can do it. Doesn't matter what we say. Okay? We can recommend it and they can choose not to do it. They're the only ones that have a budget and the authority to spend this tax money. So hopefully they will choose to fund some kind of science like this, irrelevant of what we think.
Yes.
Dr. Trefry, is this presentation or something like it going to be at this symposium on the 26th, where I know Commissioner Lober will be in attendance because he's emceeing the event, so maybe he'll listen.
So I'm in on all those. I'm in on all those emails, but I've never spoken up. So I think they think I'm talking, but obviously I don't have to. So that's I don't know.
We would like.
And Austin can do just as well as I can do.
Or Austin, yes.
Yeah. So I'm a little concerned about how broad that session has gotten. And we don't want to go out there and have sewage versus muck. It's not, we're all on the same team. And I try to tell Peter, we're on the same team. And he just doesn't get it. But they're both important.
I was going to say that, and I think what you just said was perfect, but I think if we can't as advocates for the whole picture, we need people like you to speak. And so sitting back is not an option for you. I'm going to be on the phone with you. So it's important that we all, I agree, wholeheartedly. We have in the plan, even the 2018 plan, the largest portions of funding are going to septic tank removal and muck dredging. And we continue that on into the 2019 plan. So I'm not real sure what's going on here. I have obviously my opinions, but I think you being at things like this is vital, or Austin, one of the two, because we need that voice that, the long-term scientists that have been studying the lagoon for the last 25 years need to be at the table.
And what we really want to do, John Windsor made up a great list of questions that the public asks, and we should answer some of those. That's where this bit of sewage and muck, they're not the same thing. They're just not. And other questions come out, just weird questions. So
Facebook warriors can be the worst enemies, and that's what we're fighting right now.
So yes. So I will probably be there.
Thank you.
And we can get the straws out again and see who talks.
Okay.
Charles.
So it was said by several of the commissioners that they're not scientists, and that's fine. So we have scientists, and since they're not scientists, it seems like it would be in the county's best interest to listen to those who do have the background to make the right decisions. They make a lot of decisions, county commissioners, but they may not be accountants, and they may not be, other areas that they have to delve into. But, this is a unique area. Listening to the scientists is really important.
So one of the hard parts of being a scientist is to communicate. And so what I presented today on isotopes, I worked hard. My wife said the first time, "That's great, you can't do that." She didn't even improve the last one. But believe me, the concepts behind isotopes, you'd all be head on the table. Even if I tried to make it, it's so complicated. It's just so complicated. So we got to be careful not to call it dumbing down. I didn't dumb anything down. I just tried to explain it. But and this may not be the only way to go doing all this sort of stuff. We got to be open-minded about it.
That was going to be my other question is, if we did want to move forward with, further isotope analysis of, sources and muck and that type of thing, how would we do that? What would be the process that staff would recommend us going through to provide, additional funding for something like that? Do you know?
So I think the first thing is I can look at, there's the $1 billion a year that's dedicated to respond money. And of course, we've already got things under contract for the groundwater monitoring wells, for monitoring our oyster reefs and our living shorelines and now Kilroy. So I can look at what is available and see, if we could direct some of that to this kind of data collection and validation efforts. The other thing I wanted to say is, this 2019 plan, we talked about this last month, but the initial plan was based on the best available data. And in this past year, we've done a lot of additional data collection and analysis, additional lines of evidence on, what are the worst areas for septic that should be pursued for septic to sewer. And Trefry and Austin have collected loads of data on which of the muck deposits in the lagoon are releasing the most nitrogen and phosphorus to the water column that are feeding these blooms. And so we've refined, we've reprioritized based on that new data. And so I think one important point, while there's still unanswered questions, we're not trying to pick which. We have a 10-year plan. We're not constructing all 10 years worth of projects right now. We're only constructing 1 year's worth of projects. And so if we construct the most important, the projects that appear to be the most important now, based on the data that we have now, there's a likelihood, a fairly good likelihood, that a couple years from now, when we have even more data, they may not have been the #1 project, but they were probably still in the top 10 years worth of projects. Right. And we've seen that with all of the work that we've done in the last year, year and a half, that while we found additional septic to sewer areas, that some of which were more important than some of our lowest priority ones in the first version of the plan, same thing with the muck, that the ones that we were moving forward on were still the ones that should have been in the money. So I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that we should stop, time out, you know, until we collect more information, because we know enough to get started.
And I think what you just said and what Dr. Trefry said, where, you know, we need to acknowledge what we don't know. And but we do have good data telling us where to go. We don't have data that says any one strategy is the smoking gun strategy. We have no data that says that. And so what we have in our plan is designed based on the best available data we have that says this is where we should go. And that's where I think if we continue on that path and then also fund the scientists to collect the data that we don't know and create that, you know, get that data collection, not research, but data collection, you know, done, that would be a huge benefit to all of us. So I think, you know, what you said about acknowledging what we don't know, we need to make sure that we don't project what we think we know as fact. So.
And I would add one pet thing to all of that. The talent pool of scientists that are necessary to address some of these things don't all live in Brevard County. They don't all live in Florida. Some live in Texas. Some live in Sweden. I think we've got to bring in the best people. I'm a trace element and radionuclide chemist. I spent the last 4 years coming up to speed on all the nutrients and outfitting my whole lab just to do this. But we got to get, in every field, we got to bring in the best people. They don't have to be from here.
Yeah.
And some of the best work that's been done in Oregon was done by people from Stony Brook and other places, not people from here. So that's what we got to get open to too. Not we don't have to fund our own people.
Just on coordination real quick, we don't have the information, or at least I don't have the information that I'd like to have in the lagoon, but with all the other NEPs and all the other bodies of water that have had the exact same thing happen, we can see what they've done. And we actually asked them to look at our plan and to comment on our plan and tell us what we're doing wrong. And they seem to reflect, if I'm remembering correctly, that the multifaceted approach is the way to go. So I agree we don't have enough information.
Right.
But I think comparatively, all the other NEPs have looked at it and said, you're on the right path. But sorry, John,
That's
go
right.
ahead.
So Virginia, you're preaching to the choir. This whole room and all 4 people on television is the choir, and we understand. And in 2017, we sat here with building an airplane while we were trying to fly it, was what we said. We thought we knew some stuff. We did know some things. We made the best recommendations that we could. And in 2018, and we looked at 40 and 50 projects brought in from various municipalities, and we evaluated them based on cost and used our nitrogen yardstick. And again, we did the best we could. And we got more information from the monitoring wells, from the research that you have done, sir, from other sources, from feedback from around the country. And again, we're doing our best to come up with a plan to present to this county to move this forward. And I think everybody's done a really good job. The fact that some people don't listen, who happen to have the purse strings, is another issue that we will address later.
So I think at this point, maybe I would make a motion that the asking staff to, I guess, research into how we would write up the data analytics that would allow us to know more about the efficiency at which we're spending money removing nitrogen.
Let the county do it.
Isotope, like, you know,
Yeah,
that type of research that would look at sources and you know, continue the work that's been done, I think.
Instead of staff doing this, why don't we let a county commissioner or 2 come up with this? Because they're the ones that seem to want to know more than we do at this point. And if we recommend it, it doesn't matter. Let them do it. If they want to change it, let them come forward and fund this gentleman.
I can understand the frustration right now, but I think, you know, we still got to do our jobs, and I think, you know, I would like breathe and just let the staff come back with a proposal of how we could participate in or the Lagoon Fund could participate in funding better research and and let them figure out how to do that.
I just want to echo that because regardless of what pushback has occurred or not, I think it's absolutely imperative that we continue to take an active role to push this in the place that we think is the best spot. And no matter what the level of frustration or no matter what the conversation, I don't think it would ever behoove us to say, sorry, not on our plate. That's just not the right place to go. And we need to continue to own this and drive it forward and to take strong stances on where we think we ought to go. And at the end, I've got some things I want to say when we get to our own time. But I'm definitely a firm believer of that. Look, whether we like where we're at today based upon the conversations that happened last week, look at the conversation we're having now, and it has prompted us to a whole level of detail to prove out what we're doing. That's not a bad thing.
I agree.
Is there a motion still on the floor? Because I'll second it so we can have a discussion.
Vinnie, would you repeat your motion?
My motion would be to ask staff to come back with some verbiage that would use Lagoon trust funds for additional data analytics, looking at the specific isotopes to allow us to make sure we're spending our money, or the trust money, as efficiently as possible, or the county is spending the trust money as efficiently as possible.
And I'll second that.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded that Virginia goes back and looks at ways that we might be able to utilize trust fund money, and the amount of trust fund money that might be available, that would be part of that as well, in order to be able to do some of this research on isotopes. All right? Any further discussion?
Let's call it data collection.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's really important, not to collect.
Data collection, sorry. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And we have been tasked with making recommendations. The county commission did ask us to make recommendations, and so that's what we're doing. Next on the agenda, My Lagoon Stories.
Do you want to?
I want us to have a significant amount of time to be able to have public comment and for us to be able to make comment. So we'll hold those if we have any time at the end. Otherwise, we'll view them maybe next month. All right. So I'm going to move into general public comment. First speaker is Lou Kontnick.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you all for the work that you're doing. Lou Kontnick, and I'm speaking really on behalf of myself. And I really wanted to just applaud the work that you're doing. I see you dealing mano a mano with science. And this is tough stuff where you're getting from isotopic analysis, whatever, to go ahead and translate that into a recommendation for actually cleaning the lagoon. And I respect enormously the recommendations that were made in the 2019 plan. I'm disappointed that the commission rejected that on Tuesday. And I've thought some about the bind that we're in here, which is that we have the science, we have you that are doing this incredible job of doing the homework, having the conversations, interacting with each other. And I'm hoping that the commissioners themselves, or that they will increasingly send their staff here so that they can begin to understand the translation process that you're doing. I think there are other areas as well that are important in order to go ahead and communicate what you're doing to people who need to understand that translation process. And certainly the communications efforts of Brandon and the other people within the Sorrel plan is important. And the other thing that I did want to do, and you've already paid attention to it, is that the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition, together with FIT, by no means limited to those two organizations, have the February 26th event, where I think really what we're trying to do is translate the history of this, the mano a mano science work that you're doing, and translate this into something that people who don't spend the amount of time can begin to understand the reality, both the uncertainties as well as the relative degree of confidence. So doing a great job, and we've all got to keep communicating and building that awareness. Thank you very much.
George Rosenfeld? Field? George.
My name is George Rosenfield. I live in Suntree. Now that there is no real point source pollution of sewerage in the lagoon, it seems like the main problem is muck, not sewage. But 30 years ago, there was no sewage. There was very little point source pollution of sewage and no muck in the lagoon. And eventually, when in the early 80s and 90s, the lagoon stuff was polluted, and Diane Burrell started the Marine Resources Council. And one of the main problems was point source pollution by sewage. And I would have said this if I had been able to stay at the county commission meeting Tuesday. We cleaned up, we stopped all the point source pollution of sewage at that time. Melbourne built the Vieira wetlands. Cocoa built a deep well which went down below the Floridan aquifer and built the cave down there and dumped the sewage down into that cave, and hopefully it'll never migrate upward, it'll migrate downward into the core of the earth, and eventually it might come up as a volcano out in the Pacific someplace, but it'll all be sterilized due to the heat of the core of the earth. And at that time, first, Titusville would not go along with the system of getting rid of the point source pollution, and they wanted the county to pay for it. Well, the county told Titusville they would fine them $1,000 a day if they didn't stop the point source pollution of sewage. So Titusville didn't want to pay $1,000 a day to the county, so they built the Titusville wetlands. And now Melbourne in the last hurricane dumped 21 million gallons of raw sewage into the lagoon, and they didn't even get the wrist slap. So it's a different county commission, of course, than it was back in the 90s, and they didn't fine Melbourne. If they had fined Melbourne and used the money, maybe $1 a gallon or $2 a gallon, they'd have money to clean up and improve the sewer plant at Melbourne, so they wouldn't have to dump it after a hurricane. And that's the main thing I wanted to say. Is sewage needs to be cleaned up, and we didn't have muck until more recently than 30-some years ago. And 50 and 60 years ago, when I was in the county, you could see the bottom of the lagoon all the way across. Even 30 years ago, 34 years ago when I came back to the county, you could still see the bottom of the lagoon all the way across and the bottom of the creeks. And the muck is built up, so maybe muck's the problem now because we stopped the point source of pollution, but both of them got to be stopped. I no longer, and for 20 years I haven't dug for clams when my wife wanted to make white spaghetti. And I don't know when I'll ever dig for clams again in the Indian River Lagoon. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Clarification, I think the deep well storage wasn't for wastewater, but for stormwater, just to clarify. Or is there something I don't know?
It's for wastewater.
It was for wastewater? Okay. I need to be educated on that.
Daniel Wilhelm?
For Coco's wastewater.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First off, I just want to thank you guys for spending hours of your morning here talking about muck and nitrogen. I want to talk about something else. It's a hot topic. The PFAS that has been brought to everybody's attention more recently. Some of you, maybe Courtney remembers, but some people online will definitely remember me saying that months ago I mentioned that the PFOA has a density of 1.8 grams per cubic centimeter, and PFOS has a density of 1.25 grams per cubic centimeter. These are both heavier than water with a density of about 1 gram per cubic centimeter, give or take, depending on the salinity of the water. Months ago, I theorized that the levels of the compounds in the lake, in the lagoon, would lay themselves out on the muck and be layered in over all the years. This was a theory until recently, when the county's testing came back with levels of PFAS in the muck at orders of magnitude high, 17,000% higher than what's found in the groundwater and the lagoon water. And while I think that dredging the muck out is great, we need to remove that muck out of there. I really think that we need to be very cognizant of what we do with it. We need to treat it like hazardous waste and not put it on an island, because once you scoop all that stuff out, it's got to drain. All that water, like Dr. Trefry said, is 90% water. It's all got to drain out. And if we got this pile of it sitting on an island, every time it rains, it's going to soak that water back up, absorb more PFAS, and then drain out into the lagoon. Every time it rains, more draining. And it's going to become a point source. It's going to become a point source for these pollutants. And I don't want to see it on an island in the lagoon. I don't want to see it put on a landfill. I don't want to. I've heard theories that were floated around months ago that it was going to be spread on crops. It was going to be used as fertilizer. I definitely don't want to see that if the levels of these contaminants in it are so high. But I would just like to urge you guys to deal with the muck properly when it does come out of the lagoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa Martin?
Good morning. I'm speaking to the issue of the County Commission influencing the decisions of this particular entity. I wanted to come back from a position or experience as a staff judge advocate in the military. We had a thing called undue command influence. What that is even though the commanding officer has control of a court-martial, his budget funds it, they are the ones that ensure everything happens. But that entity, the court-martial itself, is purposed to seek the truth of the matter. We have rules against the commanding officer even being in the same courtroom to avoid even implication of the way the commanding officer wants to see the results of the verdict. Okay? It is a parallel analogy to believe And this is what I sold the community on in those two very heated months of campaigning this issue, was that this entity, this committee, would be completely impervious, completely immunized from political influence. No matter who has the purse, no matter who has the loudest voice on social media, or how disgusting poop is, it doesn't matter. This board, this committee, has to maintain a focus on the truth of the matter, the science, the math, reason. So I'm asking you to please stand your ground on your response to the county commission. No matter what they say, just keep it as a consideration as if they were bringing it up to you during public comments. And let the science rule. I think there might be room for education. I mean, it seems like some commissioners are still thinking or confusing this body with the NEP Council. So obviously, there's a disconnect in what they understand is going on here. So I believe that there is some things that need to happen. I plan on submitting a citizens agenda request for their 26th of February meeting in the morning. If you have any insight, ideas, or anything procedural especially that you believe could help for future approval hearings or the process in total, please contact me. My email address is meilang76@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Bo Platt?
First, I wanted to just echo what Lou had said earlier about thanking all of y'all for all your hard work and you're getting into the weeds on all of this. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to give you some anecdotal, not a scientific observation, but anecdotal information about muck dredging, because I've had a muck dredging project in my backyard for a little over 2 years. Not related to your body, but the Ogallie River that the city of Melbourne's doing. And it's a relatively small body of water, but they're dredging 625,000 cubic yards of muck out of there, and they're about 2/3 of the way through. And just to give you a visual, I remember something Dr. Trefry had said about the 5 million cubic yards in the Brevard part of the lagoon. The Ogallie River part would be the size of a football field, 400 feet high. So that amount of muck in a relatively small body of water, Ogallie River, the Ogallie Harbor, and Elbow Creek. So they dredged behind my house, and before the visibility was pretty bad. It would usually, I measure it every Sunday, it'd usually be about 20 inches. It's doubled. It's regularly about 40 inches now. Not great, but it's a lot better than it was. I used to see an occasional dolphin, maybe once a month. Now I see them every day. Multiple dolphins coming in, fishing, knocking fish into the air. So there's a lot more life. I'm seeing a lot of snook. Yeah, if any of y'all know how to catch them, I sure don't. I've had no luck, but I'm seeing them, some big ones. So just a visual. I'm seeing a lot more live pelicans all over the place, water birds, seagulls, little blue herons, great blue herons. I've got 3 great blue heron nests in my yard now. So it's exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing the same results up and down Brevard's part of the lagoon as the projects go on. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny Lamb from the City of Melbourne.
Thank you. I would just like to clarify something that was said earlier. It was not the City of Melbourne that had the large-scale sewer discharges during the storm events, and also the Viera wetland is not ours. That is not in our service boundary area. So I just wanted to provide that point of clarification.
Thank you, Jenny.
We knew that.
Sandra Sullivan.
From South Patrick Shores. So I know there's a lot of controversy about the meeting the other night, the county commissioners meeting. I have a little bit different perspective on it. I'm a mom of 3 kids. I love reading scientific papers, but I'm not a scientist. But what I see just as a layperson is that we have issues looking back over many years of sewage being dumped into the lagoon. And many people, there's a perception with people, with residents, that the sewage is a contributor to the lagoon. And I think that people, just speaking from my perspective and the citizens that voted on this, is that if you don't at the same time fix the root problem that's causing the muck, then it just seems futile. So what we're concerned about is looking at heavy taxes. We're looking at estimates in the billions of dollars for infrastructure needed, sewage infrastructure needed here in Brevard. And when you look at that amount of numbers, that is more than what I think is reasonable for the county to bear. And I would like to suggest an idea. You have much more money coming in than was projected in your budget by about, what, $150 million? If you were to take a portion of that, and I know it just seems like it's a line you don't want to cross to deal with infrastructure, but if you were to take a portion of that and allocate, since you have more money than what you anticipated, and be gracious and say, you know what, let's work with the county. Let's take a portion of that money and let's say the county, you match that money. Then you're leveraging that money. You're making the county put some sweat into it, right? And then you take that double money and you have the state match that. And now, like you say, if you say you gave it all, you know, it'd be 150 million matched by 150 million, matched by, that'd be 300 million, matched by the state would be 600 million. That's a lot of money that could go a long way to fixing the infrastructure here. And I think you really have to look at this problem as cause and effect. And if you just work on the effect, and yeah, the muck needs to be dealt with, but you also need to look at the cause. Thank you.
So, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Thank you. By the way, I was hoping Dr. Rolfer would be here so we could have this.
Yes.
But he's not. So we took 150, I'm with you, and another 150 matched, and we get the state to match it, and maybe even the feds, okay?
Right.
But this problem is estimated, I believe I've read, to be $4 billion.
Yes.
With a B.
Yes, exactly.
So $1 million doesn't approach the problem. If we took all the money that we're going to collect in 10 years, we haven't even got $500 million, and we're talking about a multi-billion dollar. Might there be other resources, financial resources, that could address the infrastructure that should have been done?
Yes, but as Mr. Randy Fine said, when he goes to state and he says, okay, have you done everything you need to do here? Are you doing the best effort to deal with it? It's about perception too. So if you're not seen as doing what's necessary here to the best of the ability, the best of your resources, then it's not going to be looked upon very well. And I'll tell you what, right now, as I was not involved civically at all, none at all, but everybody probably knows my name in this room at this point. Okay? You don't? Okay. Well, the dump on
I'm glad you're here.
Shores. Okay, so I'm very civically involved. Why? Because I am totally disgusted beyond belief that we live like a third world country dumping sewage into our lagoon. And you look back at the people who have lived here for a long time, who give accounts of what the lagoon used to be, and there's been neglect here for so many years, and it just makes me want to just pull my hair out.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I just don't think $1 million solution is needed for $1 billion problem. I think we should come up with $1 billion solution.
Good luck.
It's doable.
You have to start with bite-sized chunks, okay?
Thank you, by the way. Thanks for letting me.
Courtney, did you want to say something? No?
I'll just address it in a moment.
Okay. We're going to have to extend our meeting.
I'll make a motion to extend the meeting for 20 minutes. How many cards do we have? How many?
Yeah, the public comment is finished, so this would be our comments at this point.
I'll make a motion to extend the meeting 30 minutes.
All those, is there any discussion? Yes,
I was wondering, when we discussed if I could go first, because I have some commitments at the Space Center to
I amend my motion to allow Charles to go first.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, Charles.
Yeah, so, we're looking at environmental problems. There was a study done, and one of the biggest issues that the public often had would be a hazardous waste dump in their area. That got a lot of attention, and they're really bad, especially for the people who live next or adjacent to those dumps. But if you look at what the scientists say, that's kind of low on the scale. They're looking at more regional or global things, and maybe acid rain or global climate change. And I'm really thinking that when we have these overflows from the sewage, that's kind of like the hazardous waste analogy. They're real bad, we don't want them, but if you look at the bigger problem, it's all the other contributors that we have talked about during the couple of years on our board. So I don't want us to lose sight. They're important, and it's about perceptions, and Dr. Trefry mentioned it about how to communicate. Scientists sometimes don't do a really good job of communicating, and we got to do a good job of being accessible, of the county commissioners opening their doors to people who can help them understand the rationale that we're using to make these decisions and recommendations. I think the one thing about the Lagoon is it brings all of us together. It should anyways. And I think we all care about it, and I think that's why there's some passion, but unfortunately it seems like it's kind of tearing some of us apart. And we as a committee need to help cure that. So I just want to get that out. We need to move forward, and let's keep doing what we've been doing.
Thanks, Charles. Who else would like to? I guess we'll just go around. Todd?
Oh, okay. Okay. Just a couple things. I received an email from a prior board member making some comments about kind of just stepping down, throwing our hands up. And I won't do that. And I think that's just a bad attitude. And we have had great discussion here today, and we will continue to have great discussion. And the reality is there are different perspectives out there, and we need to listen to them. And we need to get to the solution, because in the end, I care about and I'm committed to the Lagoon, as is everybody here, as is everybody that was at that county commission meeting, including I have the confidence of everyone that sat up on that dais. Now, are all of our approaches the same? Probably not. Do we all think we've got but there's many different things that we got that are challenges that we have to tackle. We need to fix the Lagoon, right? We clearly need to fix our infrastructure. This tax may or may not be the solution to fixing our infrastructure. That's part of our discussion. If we just have one big bucket of money and we prioritize everything, it's a lot simpler. But guess what? It's not the way government works. Right? You have individual pots of money that are set aside with very specific purposes. This Lagoon tax was approved with some very specific purposes and is very science-based. A couple other comments on that. In the end, we're an advisory board. The county commission makes those funding decisions. We should listen, but I'm not going to, and I will listen, and I will make my comments out of consideration of what they have to say, but in the end, we have to make decisions that are advisory in nature. That county commission has a choice to either accept that or not, and they have many other factors that they're going to weigh in to make that decision, and I respect that and I appreciate it. I would caution all of us to not be overly protective of the plan we've written. There's a thing called pride of authorship or pride of ownership that often gets in the way of listening and being critical of yourself. I think we have a very good plan. I'm not sure we have the plan, because I'm not sure there is the plan. The reality is there could be changes that could be made one direction or another that keep in with the intent of the voters, that keep with good science, but that aren't exactly what's there today. So I think we should be open-minded, and we should listen to that. What I'm not willing to support is anything that is a revision of the plan that is not in keeping with the original voter objective and what was put in front of the voters. And I'm not in support of keeping anything, of supporting a plan or plan changes that are not defensible by data. I'm not willing to go there. And I respect the command and control, the command discussion, and I think I've seen strong enough personalities on this committee that I don't think that will occur. I think we'll end up in the right spot. I do think we should clearly articulate our why. You know, we've put this highly technical plan together that has a lot of moving pieces, and there's a lot that we've discussed in here about why we're doing things, about why muck is important, why we don't think investing in infrastructure with this tax dollar is the right decision, why there are some components of infrastructure that we are willing to invest in. And I'd like to kind of call those out. You know, we get some discussion about repairing leaky sewer infrastructure. There's two reasons that I don't necessarily support it with these tax dollars. One is, at least the data that we've seen to date as far as nutrient contributions doesn't support that it is it has been the major player. The spill data that was shown, the 20 million gallons over 7 years, is 1,000 pounds of nitrogen as compared to the tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds that are coming from these other sources. The second is, part of the reason this tax was put into place was as a dedicated funding source where no other funding sources existed. Utility revenues are in place to maintain infrastructure, and maintaining that infrastructure is an obligation of their permits. We are allocating very good money toward upgrade of infrastructure, such as higher level treatment on wastewater plants and things of that nature that go beyond the minimum regulations that these utilities have to comply with. And we're seeing data that says that the nutrients of the utilities that aren't treating to that lower level of nitrogen is a contributor. Guess what? That passes both tests. It's something that there's not a specific funding source that has to be used, and we're saying there's enough impact. So that's a good thing. If there's some shift between muck and septic, okay. We've talked about, so we think septic's a major contributor, and let's do it. But let's also make sure every city that's getting money is willing to make sure that people connect right now. And it's not just put the line and hope they connect, because that's a common issue, that lines go in and people aren't required to connect, and then they don't connect for years. That's not good use of money. So let's make sure that happens too. But if there's some shift that keeps projects moving and gets more buy-in out in the community, great. I don't think it's an all-or-nothing solution. So I would very much be an advocate if there are other high-impact septic projects and we're seeing data that we think that those are a major contributor, let's go for it. You know, if a muck project doesn't happen next year and it happens 4 years out, okay. But we're still working in the right places. And I want to reiterate what I said earlier, too. I still do think there's a lot of administrative and policy choices that get made that affect performance, and that we need to at least make sure that those are on the table as part of our discussion. So, but I think we need to have the tough conversations. In the end, I hope we come forward with if we revise the plan, that we revise the plan that is thoughtful, that listens to the perspectives that we heard the other night, but that is also keeping with the intent that this committee has shown since we've been meeting, which is to make sure we're impactful and make sure we're consistent with the original intent of the voters.
Thank you, Tom. Courtney.
So I actually watched a little bit of the meeting. I had to turn it off. I think we have a great plan, and I think so. It was a little disappointing. I think what I need to just reiterate too is that, when we did the infrastructure sales tax in the beginning, there's the concern that if we did that tax, the county would get a portion, all the cities would get a portion according to statute, and we'd all be doing different projects and nobody would be working together. So we decided to create the fund, and we created this big process where all the cities handed our funds over to the county, and we have this agreement, and we have the COC, and the cities participate in the decision-making process by appointing half of the COC, and that in doing so, the county commission would give great weight to the decisions and the recommendations of the COC, because that's how the cities are participating in how their money is being directed in restoring the lagoon. And so that, I thought, until the last couple of meetings, has been happening, and I think at this point, maybe it's kind of fell off a little bit. So I just wanted to remind that, you know, the community that this is how the cities participate, and, you know, without the cities giving our portion to the county, you know, that fund would be a whole lot less, and there'd be a bunch of people doing tiny little projects and not a big coordinated Save Our Lagoon effort. I also, because I'm a city manager, it's like in my DNA to want to satisfy the majority of a commission or a council, you know, and so I want to address the concerns, but at the same time, I don't see any science at this point that says we should change the plan, because what I see is people sidestepping the process of going through the COC and going directly to the commission. And so I would invite, maybe, so we could see that science, maybe we could ask those members that were speaking at the county commission to come present to us their perspective, because I haven't heard it yet, other than seeing it on Facebook and the county commission. All right, so I wanted to also kind of go through a comment by Mel Martin, who also spoke earlier. I saw something on Facebook, and she's so much more articulate than I am. But she said this on Facebook, and I thought it was a good quote. She says, "It's fine to disagree with the plan. It's specifically designed to be adaptive to best ideas and better science. But to have folks sidestepping the COC and addressing the commissioners directly to change the plan, you kill everything we've worked so hard to build. If you have a substantive question, concern, or idea, take it to the COC. If you have a process question or concern the COC can address, then take it to the BOCC. And if you're not going to invest hours to understand the full picture of what all is going on, please don't throw rocks at something you don't understand." And that's what, you know, I see that's what I see that's happening. And I think, you know, even though we want, I think there's opportunity here in the plan that if we want to move some dredging project money for projects that maybe haven't gotten that far in planning yet or permitting, you know, and move that to a septic project that we think that it's going to move fast, then I can see us doing that. But other than that, I honestly can say that I don't see a scientific reason to recommend anything different at this point. But I do see, you know, if we do have, you know, some project over on the dredging piece that isn't quite there yet, and we think it's going to take longer, and we want to move that over to a septic project that seems to be moving faster, you know, and do something that way to satisfy some concerns, I can see us doing that. So, you know, I would support that. And I would also support having, you know, that other perspective to please come and speak with us, because I would like to hear it. I haven't heard it yet. And, you know, I agree with Todd. You know, there is a big difference between using the Surreal funds for utility maintenance and capacity projects, which are the responsibility of utility. And even though, you know, there may be community sentiment that doesn't understand the difference between, you know, ratepayers and Surreal funds, I can assure you that the other utilities in Brevard County that are not the county utility, that did raise their rates to do their capacity projects and to do their maintenance, would be very upset to know that they had the political expediency and the ability to raise their rates in the face of large opposition. I've never seen a lot of people go, "Yes, I want my rates," you know, raise my rates. They did that anyway. In the face, they did the right thing. They would be pretty upset to know that their Surreal funds that they gave the county for lagoon restoration projects are being used for utility maintenance. And I think that would be a big problem for the whole county and all the cities. So if we do, like we did last time with Cocoa Beach, you know, when you see a project come in that goes above and beyond and tips them over the point of, you know, going from good to great, and that's the stuff that we're here to do. And, you know, so if I see that coming in, I'll be very much in support of that. And I think the way you know, to kind of define that was real good. And but other than that, I would love to see us come together and make everyone happy. But I do agree with the community sentiment that was spoken earlier, that we have to stick with the science. And right now, unless I see some, you know, major study that says we're doing something wrong, I just don't see a big, real reason to change it. But again, if you see some projects that are easy to move, from maybe some projects, like if we have a subject project that there's an opportunity to go after Representative Fines, if that bill passes, that's an opportunity, And so if we want to move money around to grab opportunities, I'm all for that. And I think that's a great way to go. And I'd be absolutely supportive of that.
Let me just say, one of those potential opportunities you discussed last month, we started the research on package plants, and we weren't able to acquire enough data to get to a point where we felt good about moving those forward. You gave a very compelling argument for get that data, you're gonna find problems.
Right.
And so we are working with utilities to try to collect that data expeditiously, and that's one of the things we hope to be able to bring to you in March to consider.
Okay. See, that's an opportunity. And then if that qualifies for the matching funds on the state level, even better, so I'm all for that. But other than that, I think we do, I would like to see the county commission, like when we brought back the education piece and we tried to do what they wanted, then we didn't even get that recommendation passed. So there's some, feeling, I think, now that, that we're kind of talking to the wind, and I think, it'd be nice if we could get a little bit more support from the county commission on our recommendations.
John?
Me? Okay. I was appointed to this board by the League of Cities, and so I have reached out and asked for some input from them. I haven't gotten anything yet, but no one's made any comments to me. For the most part, over my duration on this board, I've made a plea several times before about the public contacting us. There's an email address to this committee that anybody can write questions to us. The few people who have contacted me, I've gotten back to them. I know Vinny's mentioned before he's gotten lots of contacts and he's gotten back to them.
Excuse me, could you mention what your role is so we know what you're talking about? What is your position on the committee?
I'm Lagoon advocacy member.
Thank you.
John Windsor.
Thank you.
And actually in the beginning, I applied because I had some technical expertise, a little bit, over the years. And, I'm struggling with what my role is on this committee. I mentioned this last meeting. For those of you who weren't here, we talked about the education and outreach issue. And my first thought was to send back what we had originally sent to the commission. But then I started thinking about, well, that leaves total control in their hands, and they can do whatever they want with the money. And I thought, now let's try to keep this bus on the road and moving in the right direction. So my number one concern for the Lagoon is to make sure we move forward as effectively as we can, those are the waffle words, with Lagoon restoration. I think that just sending this plan back now to the Lagoon would be useless. I mean, to the commission would be useless. We need to work on somehow sending our message better. Maybe we have to shift some monies, but I don't want to stop this process. I am concerned right now that if we don't get this passed real soon, that some of the long-range planning that some of the cities have done for muck projects or for any other projects are going to be put on hold for another year or two. And so I know that we were supposed to make specific comments here at the end about what we'd like from Virginia for the next meeting. The term sewage infrastructure has been used pretty loosely by a lot of people. And I'm, in particular, the commissioners who want more money from muck to go to sewage infrastructure. I'd like to know what that means. And by the way, I have offered to go talk to any of the commissioners who wanted to talk about this, and nobody's asked me any questions. I don't believe as a member of this committee I should be out in the community doing political lobbying on any position. I'm here to represent the public, I think. Again, I'm not sure about what my role is on this committee. And so I don't go to a person's office, knock on the door and say, you have to do this. I'm available if they need information. And I've made that known to all of them. For several years now, I've made it known to all of them. And so I would like that clarification on what they mean by sewage infrastructure is not the conversion of septic to sewer, a sewer I mean, I think it is, but I think that and I sat in the meeting, my butt's killing me now, because I sat for 6 hours in that meeting. I left and the meeting was still on TV when I got home. That sewage, the septic to sewage is infrastructure to me, but I'm not sure that means the same thing to all. I think they're thinking about that as that's something else. I'm talking to, I want something fixed in my backyard that spills raw poop in the lagoon. And I understand that. That's important. It needs to be fixed. But I need to know what they're thinking. I need clarity from them so I can function here more effectively. I also, as we move forward, if we do make any changes to the plan, I think we need to note that the changes to the plan were not directed by us. We're trying to make, the directions are coming from outside. And so, because the analysis of the effectiveness of the plan is going to come in at, are you getting these things done? And we'll take the blame, or Virginia's going to take the blame for things that don't work, and I know who's going to take the credit for all the things that work. And so let's make sure that as we move forward that we know what things have been changed in the plan. And then finally, I think what we need to add to any of these items that come up on the work plan is when we expect the projects to be finished, and that way that would help the commissioners who are concerned about projects not meeting their deadline, but it also helps the public see that when we talk about nitrogen removal, it's not happening the day we sign the contract with the entity. It's going to happen when the project's finished. And so maybe we need to have some little tag along the line. I'm open to suggestions about how we move forward effectively, and I'm not sure if we're at some sort of impasse that's part of our, some local problem here, or if there's some, bigger dialogue that has to happen. I'm not sure if having a joint meeting would help. I'm open to anything. I think we need to move forward. I'm an advocate for the lagoon. I think everybody here is. How do we do it? I thought maybe we had a chance of passing the plan on Tuesday night. That's why I was there. Apparently we're not, and it's going to have to change. And I don't want to get into this thing about sending this plan back, and then it comes back again, and it comes back again. I wrote my thesis and my dissertation many years ago, and I was sick of that process of 8 iterations, 9 iterations, 10 iterations. I'd like to get this right next time around. And I think we need the commission's input on that to help us make it right in their eyes. Okay, thank you.
Karen.
I'm getting over laryngitis, so I apologize. I'm usually quiet anyway. I echo everything all three of you just said, and I'm sure the rest of the round table. Staff has been amazing in the last 2 years. I was very disappointed. I watched the meeting live. I think there's a lot of emotion and disinformation out there with the public, and even with some of maybe the commissioners. The plan is a live document. It's always going to be changing because of the science, which we have to stick with, which Courtney and Todd just talked about as well. The disinformation, 4 people probably are watching this meeting, unfortunately, and we need thousands of people to be watching these meetings and listening to the scientists and all the people that are here schooling us. When I came here 2 years ago, I cannot believe I feel like I got a free education sitting here. And if I can tell 3 people what I'm learning here, hopefully they can spread that as well. So getting the word out and getting the information out is huge. I also think the other problem, not with us and staff and maybe the scientists, because they've been screaming for years about what's going on, is impatience by the public. I've seen that on Facebook and social media, even in conversations I have when I'm loading kayaks onto the water. I can't tell you how many people in the last 2 weeks have started yelling, "Oh, there's the algae again, and it's dead seaweed because of the, it smells, it's dying, it's natural seaweed out of the water, and they think it's another algae bloom, and that's just been the last 2 weeks. So luckily I was there to tell them it wasn't that, but that's just a little tiny, misinformation and conception, So I think this board is amazing. Everybody's working hard. Everybody, is trying to help their communities, especially Courtney. Mel Martin, I saw your post, and I'm glad you read it out loud. It was very well written, and it was perfect. It was 100% perfect. That is a big problem. So I hope my tenure here is over, just for personal reasons and work. But I will be here in March if somebody takes my place, and I think they are. I'll be sitting over there, and I'll be at as many meetings as I can, especially if it's rainy and cold. If the weather's nice, I probably won't be here, and I'll be watching it. I'll be the 5th person watching online. But I think we need to stick with the science. I think, and what John just said too, I think even with the county commissioners, be more specific, maybe with the infrastructure and sewer. And everybody needs to realize that the projects are going to be changing. One gets better. Science is going to get better. I think the original plan was so well written, it saw problems coming in the future. I don't think we were going to see it in 2 years with misconception and just where the money should be getting spent. But this committee is really important, and I hope you all stay on for, I wish you guys stay on for 10 years because I'm really proud of you guys. And I'm proud, and it was a privilege to be with you guys. Hopefully my voice gets better and I'll start talking when I come back. But stick with the science, and kudos to, I'm actually, on a side note, I'm proud to live in Brevard County. I didn't realize that there were so many passionate people and scientists working here that live here. It's not just their jobs. They want to see their community grow and fix the lagoon. People just need to understand that everybody wants the lagoon to get fixed. And do your homework, do some research, listen to the scientists, that's what we're doing on this board. And I think, if the community starts to educate themselves and understand what's going on and come to the meetings and not go straight to the county meetings and the county where there's a lot of misinformation going on, especially when the public starts to speak. Just come to the meetings, do your research, and get involved, We're all involved, obviously, in this table, and the county, the staff is, but I think everybody that, get angry, get involved, go volunteer, talk to the scientists, they're all over. There's even, go have a beer with a scientist things going on with Dr. DeFries and everybody. I mean, God, you can't make, they want to tell people what's going on. If you don't want to go to these meetings, I think people need to, just get more involved, and stop saying, throw your hands up and just be mad at the wrong people and frustration. People are frustrated, and, it's understandable, but you can't get frustrated and have the wrong and couple that with wrong information, because then it's a fireball. So, thank you.
I'd make a motion to extend the meeting 15 minutes.
I think that's going to be enough. All right. Do I have a second? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. David.
Okay, so
Move your mic around, Dave.
we're averaging our time. We got to get it down to less than 5 minutes per.
3 minutes per.
Well, I want to echo what everybody has before me has said. Privileged to serve on this committee, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done. There's 2 points that I want to kind of add to the discussion. One is I have a fear that this committee is maybe slowly being, the optics on the outside are that we're maybe becoming somewhat of an obstructionist committee. And I don't like that at all. I take a strong objection to that. As far as I know, we've never told anyone that they couldn't speak here. We've never turned down anybody who's wanted to present here. And for people or bodies to go directly to the county commission to make a case for or against something and bypassing us as if we don't have open ears or don't want to listen or don't want to hear, I take very strong objection to. I want them to come here. I want to hear what they have to say. We talk a lot about responding to science, and that's what we do here. If there's science out there that we need to learn about, I want representatives of that science to be here. And we, I guess part of our job is to solicit that science and create a forum where they feel open and welcome to be here. I want them here. I want to hear what they have to say. So I hope our next plan, of course, is our final plan. Hopefully, third time is a charm. But I want to, I really want to emphasize that, maybe there's something we can do to make sure we're not framed as an obstructionist body. I take very strong objection to that. The other thing I want to mention really quick with the limited time that I'm going to give is I'm also really disappointed, a lot of disappointment here today, but how small our education and outreach fraction of our budget is, but yet it seems to be easily the most vulnerable part of the entire budget. And I think when you think of it that way, I'm hoping we can get more support everywhere on this committee, certainly at the commission and the public, to defend our puny outreach budget a little stronger. If we don't educate the next generation of Brevardians to live in harmony with the lagoon and to be advocates for the lagoon, what are we doing here? I mean, that's a question I'm asking. What are we doing? That's all.
I'll reserve the right to speak last.
And I'm not going to try to be obstructionist, and I want to start by thanking Todd for a number of times today saying much more eloquently than I'm able to, and clearly I'm more emotional. So thank you, Todd. And Dr. Windsor, for the folks that don't know, this is the guy you go to learn about what's going on here. I'm clearly not a scientist. I fish. I've attended every single meeting but one since January of 2017. We have been through 3 budget cycles. We have listened to some goofy ideas where people wanted money for things that made no sense. We have read proposals that are page and page long and debated them and calculated how many pounds of nitrogen. We have listened to commissioners argue there wasn't enough money in their district. By the way, who cares? The river doesn't care about an artificial political district. We are here to do the best we can with a relatively small amount of money over a 10-year period to fix this lagoon. I don't agree with every decision this group has made, but I respect this group, many of whom most of y'all are much smarter than me. But we've come to some really good programs. Is it the perfect plan? Of course it's not. We recognize it's not a perfect plan. We recognize that the plan needs to evolve. And we worked really, really hard. Not just this group, the scientists, staff, volunteers diligently to put together a plan. We have responsibility, at least I believe I have a responsibility to this lagoon, to the voters, and to the taxpayers. But we have absolutely zero authority. We can't pass a budget. We can't sign a contract. We can't spend $1 of tax money. All we can do is recommend. The county commissions is the only one with the authority to spend tax money. Only they can approve, reject, or modify our proposed budget. And by the way, they can do it with or without us. Every other department in this county comes forward with a budget. For some reason, they don't want to listen to natural resources. They don't want to listen to the scientists. They don't want to listen to us, is what it appears. I personally, and it won't make any difference because I can't vote, but I personally will not support modifying a plan that is based on science and that so many of us have diligently worked to create. If people want political cover and they want us to be the political cover for decisions that should have been made and failures that were made years ago, or the inability to step up and make the right decision today because it's difficult, I refuse to endorse that. I refuse to provide them political cover. It's been an awesome opportunity. Thanks, y'all.
Take care.
All right, I guess first off, so I don't know, this Italian thing's all about family, and Dr. Windsor, you're kind of like the uncle that just comes around and spits some wisdom, you know, and John's like the other uncle that's always complaining about one thing or another. And, but you get wisdom from him because you play your ideas in your head, and you're like, well, maybe that is a stupid idea. So first off, I coming from that angle, I do appreciate the commission arguing with us. I know, I think things are made better when they're tested. That's a form of science. They're argued, and so I thank them for that. One thing I won't do, and I know there has been a lot of talk, and Dr. Windsor, you said this, distinguishing sewage infrastructure is huge. Because here's the thing, and I know a lot of money they want to go towards sewage infrastructure. If we did not have one septic tank on the lagoon, and we had a pocket full of money, I might be more open to spending money on stuff that utilities would need to pay. But the way I view it is that every day, not only on rain events, every day, every septic tank that is failing is leaking into the lagoon. And I know we have storm events, but every day those septic tanks are leaking. So that to me is the biggest point source without any money. There is no money. So that to me is one of the things. The other thing is like John said about responsibility and duty, I can't approve or I can't vote for something that I feel would set up the public. And if the rates, if they want to increase capacity or they want to fix their lines, and we do it with our money now, but none of the rates change, then that means in 10 or 15 or 20 years, we're going to be in the same spot. And I can't do that. I have to make decisions that I think are going to be long-term. So if there's a rate change or something that will support those, that's a different issue. But I just can't do it and say, well, we're going to kick the can down the road for our capacity costs and our infrastructure. The other thing is, paying attention to what people see and is on the news. I'm looking at my watch because I don't want to talk too long. There was, the past, 2 or 3 years, there were lots of pipe breaks along Riverside and South Patrick. But about 5 or 6 years ago, I think Howard Tipton talked and said that this is an area that needs to be fixed. And the county had a plan for it. The county has, I think they've sped up that plan now because of all those leaks. And I know that was in the news, but I think just because something is in the news doesn't mean that it's the most important thing. So I think, again, we need to make sure that we're bouncing that. Dr. Windsor asked the question, what do we do? And I've been holding this answer the whole meeting because I was so excited when I thought about it after watching the meeting last night. Watching it on YouTube and then going to 2x speed really cuts some time out of your day. So I would encourage everybody. Although the meetings are backwards, whoever does the YouTube, I think number 2 out of 3 is actually 3 out of 3, and I think 3 out of 3 is 1 out of 3. So you had to flip around to find the proper order. But 2x speed is really cool. With that, and to your answer. This is what I'd recommend, and I actually would if the committee likes this, I would make a motion. The commission said, one of the commissioners said, this board is a different makeup. Commissioner Smith talked about going out to the public to sell this plan. So did Mel Martin, and I was at many of those meetings. There are other people on the commission that weren't at those meetings, and they're there now. And they do control the dollars. There's nothing, that's the bottom line, and I'm okay with that. That's their prerogative. But what I would like and what I would invite is I would invite a workshop between our board and theirs. They have questions, we have questions, we have answers, they have answers. Let's get together, because this project plan is huge. There's passion, there's so much involved. Imagine the viewership. We'll go from 4 to 8 people watching online if we can get everybody together. But I would actually make a motion that we extend an invitation to the county commission for a joint workshop. And I know everybody's time is tough. I understand, but I think this is huge. This is important. So I think the worst thing you can do is not ask. So I'd like to ask that we do that. Barring that, or actually including that, I will myself be reaching out to each commissioner to set up a meeting. I apologize. I'm a big believer in self-responsibility, and I could have done that in the past, and I haven't. So I apologize for that, and I will be doing that. But I still would like to make a motion, and I guess I'll make a motion now. I'd like to make a motion that we extend an invitation to the county commission for a joint workshop to be scheduled, hope at its earliest convenience, hopefully before another vote.
Is there a second?
I think it's a good idea. I'm not sure the mechanics of it. I don't think it's going to be possible to get it done in less than a month.
There is a board workshop on the lagoon proposed in April. And I would guess that would be the earliest that it would be possible if they were willing to consider opening that workshop up to include the COC, which I have no idea whether they, would entertain that. But
I just think bouncing the ball back and forth, and I just don't think there's an understanding. And I'm okay with that. That happens all the time. And I can go and talk to somebody, and John and Stephanie, but I think it's better if we talk together to them. Courtney, sorry, I know you had...
I was just going to say that I have tried multiple times to schedule meetings with at least one of the commissioners, and I have not been successful in getting that done. And I'm a city manager of a city. I represent a whole city in the county, and I haven't.
More the reason than to extend an invitation from the Oversight Committee.
Virginia, I love the idea. I don't think it could happen for a number of reasons, but is there a way that you can ask commissioner staff to very specifically come back to this group with what concerns and questions they have about this particular plan? I mean, I heard some very general comments from one or two of the commissioners. Maybe we can spend $200,000 on a more effective idea. I have no idea what that is, okay? And I'm certainly willing to consider any idea, especially a cheap idea like $200,000, with science behind it, okay? But if they could be more specific as to what their concerns are, I think it would help us if this group chooses to modify the proposal. They haven't been, pardon me, but in 3 budget hearings, I do know that staff has listened, but not one of the commissioners or staff has presented to us when they were elected or when they were private citizens and come and said, hey, I think you guys should include this idea. I mean, we listened to people with some pretty goofy ideas. We would have listened to anybody. They weren't here, so maybe they can at least tell you, here's our problem. You have a $40 million project this year, roughly, okay? And we're arguing over $200,000 here and $25,000 in a brochure. Can they be more specific so we can address or educate or whatever the right, solve the problem?
I just feel like playing the... Oh, go ahead, Stephanie, please.
We have a motion on the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And while that is very valuable discussion, it doesn't really pertain to the motion that's on the floor.
Well, maybe that's the meeting we have.
And so that's, is there further discussion about the idea of inviting the county commission to have a joint meeting with us.
Other than to say that I like the optics of it, they can say no, that'll be public record.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those, Courtney?
Or allow us to participate in the April workshop, and that might be an easier thing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe amend the motion to ask staff to communicate with the county manager, whoever would be appropriate, to see if there's a way that we can get, boards together in the sunshine for a workshop.
It'd be good to know what the problems are, so we
Okay.
can talk about them.
I amend my motion to that, I guess?
And John, you had the second.
Yeah, it's fine. That's an invitation, right?
Correct,
Right.
just an invitation.
So the motion on the floor is that we're inviting the county commission to meet with us to discuss the Lagoon plan. All those in favor signify, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, the original motion that I heard included that would happen before you finalize the plan. So is that part of the motion?
I don't know how we respond back without.
Yeah, you need the input.
So that is our request. If they come back with a different proposal, that's their request.
So we could get better direction on the plan that they're looking for. Because right now, I have to say, we're just throwing darts at it.
So the reason I asked for clarification is because I know there are city projects that are seeking legislative appropriation match using the dollars that are in the proposed plan as the local match. And so I'm not sure that I'm afraid that this timetable would mean that they would have to pull those legislative appropriation requests, which have already been sponsored by members of the delegation.
Could we approve, could I amend I'm trying to think if there's a way we could approve the projects that are on a timeline basis, but still allow the conversation to take place on the bigger projects, which I think are the issue anyways.
Or if there were any part of the plan that everyone could agree to and move that forward and leave some smaller part of it for further discussion.
So there's only a small part that appears to be under discussion and complaint right now, okay? But the decision or inaction by the commission 2 months in a row has now put funding for county and city projects that are looking for other sources of money from state at risk. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
So their inability to make a decision or to give us clear direction so that we can come back with a plan that everybody can move forward with is already putting the Lagoon plan at risk.
Are there any dredging projects that we're waiting right now on funding?
Legislative.
There's one in the back, a hand raise. There's a city in the back with a hand raise.
And the county has a O'Galley River, in the O'Galley area, not the O'Galley River, in the open lagoon near the O'Galley Causeway. We have that request sponsored by Thad Altman, and we have septic to sewer requests sponsored by Tyler Soroy.
Okay, again,
Extend the meeting?
we need to extend the meeting.
I make a motion to extend the meeting another 15 minutes.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor and a second to invite the county commission.
I was just going to give you a real quick, maybe possibly everybody can agree to this. Maybe we could just ask the county commission to have a joint workshop to seek direction on an overall, how we move forward on the plan in the
Long-range
future,
plan.
but we still need to get this plan passed. So can we do this at the next meeting and come up with a plan, amended plan to turn into them? Because we do, like the county, several cities have appropriation requests, and some cities are waiting, they have their permits, they're just waiting on this funding to move forward. So, when we talk about wanting to get projects done and, getting upset that people need extensions at the same time, by not passing the plan, we're holding up, multiple projects.
I didn't think my motion would would say that we didn't do that. We were asking for an invitation, but then next month, we can still go ahead. If we don't get it, and if they say no, or there's not enough time, then next month, we could still go ahead and put another plan, back through. Sorry, Todd, I know.
We've put the
Wait
plan
a minute,
forward.
wait a minute.
It's not
Todd,
our...
did you have
Just
something?
to comment, I think it's critical because this is a prime year for funding, so we can't risk it. Funding for water quality is ripe for this year. We cannot risk it.
Suppose that we just ask them to include us in the meeting that they're planning for April.
That would be
That-
good. I think that would be great.
Yeah. but it
Could we
may
just
not.
emphasize that we want a meeting as soon as possible?
Yes.
I mean, that's the reality, right? We're going to keep moving regardless, but we want that meeting as soon as possible, whether they deny it or not.
I think in my original motion was as soon as possible or before the vote, but
That'd be great.
I'm good.
Or before.
I amend my motion to everything that everyone else has said, so.
So where do we stand on the motion, Virginia?
Extend an invitation for a joint workshop as soon as possible.
Okay.
Perfect.
Whatever else happens, happens.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
We should just ask Virginia for the motions from now on.
Yes. Okay, Lorraine, it's
Okay,
to
I'll try
you.
to be brief, but I will, it's an honor to be on the committee and to serve with so many great minds, and I don't think I'm as smart as John. We'll miss him. Over the last year, I did a lot of walking and knocking on doors, and the only thing everyone agreed on is that they love the lagoon. And in every case where there is an opportunity to talk about that, they had no idea that they could impact the lagoon. I think the intent of the plan, I always thought the intent of the plan and the Citizen Oversight Committee was to have the public be a part of the solution. And if this is long-term, generational, I don't know how we're going to do that without some education. And if the commissioners, if there are ways that we can make that more accountable, I kept hearing it. I didn't get to listen to Tuesday because I was in another municipal event, but I have heard it referred to as public relations in the back versus public education, and I think we really need to do some public education, and I hope that that just won't be thrown out, so that the public can really be a part of the solution.
That's it? Right. Thank you. I am representing the committee as education. But my training is as a scientist. My undergraduate degree is in microbiology. And I tell people that I'm a scientist who chose to be an educator. And because of that, I am very passionate about the fact that we need to be providing education as part of this plan. There is so much misinformation. We heard some of it today in public comment. And the only way that we're going to be able to combat misinformation is to educate. There's no other way. Now, is it going to be 100% effective? Probably not, but we've seen the effect of some of the fertilizer education that we've done. We're hoping to see some effect from the grass clippings education plan that we want to put forward. But those are critical pieces for the individuals who actually voted in this plan to understand the dynamics of what we've seen and what we've heard. And then because I do have a past background as a municipal elected official, I also want to address the issue of utilities and infrastructure. And the municipality that I represented had its own sewer plant. We made the investments. And Courtney touched on it, but I think it's critical that if you want to take money from the half-penny sales tax that everyone in the county is putting in money for and use it to benefit only a few entities and not the county as a whole, I think you have real problems. And as a resident of a municipality that has put in the money for our infrastructure, I would be one of the first to raise my hand and say, that's not right, it's not fair. It's a misdirection of funds. You're taking money from Peter to pay Paul, and that's not right. And as Todd said, using the money to improve infrastructure above and beyond what is necessary and required, that's a different ballgame. But to actually use money that should be spent by the entity itself in order to maintain, and I agree totally with Vinnie. If we do that, where are we in 5 years, in 10 years? The rate structure is not built to be able to maintain what's going on. It has to be. It has to be. And if some municipalities or some entities are doing it and others are not, that's not fair to take the money and use it somewhere else. And so it's an equity issue. And then, what did our citizens vote on? How did they vote to spend this money? If we are using it in a way that they did not authorize, that's wrong. It's just plain wrong. And it breeds distrust. I mean, that's what people said. And anyone that I talked to that was on the fence about voting for the half-penny sales tax, they're like, well, we're voting on this, but they can change it if they want. No, no. This is what we voted on. This is what it needs to stay. And so I agree. I cannot support going back with anything that is going to violate what the citizens voted on. Good for you. All right. Thank you very much. We're at the end of our meeting, and I appreciate all the input that we've had today. I appreciate everything, and I'm hoping that we can find a solution. I'm sorry. Meeting adjourned. Oh, wait.
I was just going to thank you to our two members who,
last
this is their last meeting.
Oh, yes.
Karen and John, thank you.
Karen and John, thank you, thank you, thank you.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period. The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions